and locally, from compounded crisis globally to domestic challenges, and also a polarized country. Facing the new Brazilian government are significant challenges, but also I would like to highlight the plenty and great opportunities that can also be found in Brazil. And the whole world was shocked with the events of January 8th. These received domestic and international disapproval, but in the aftermath, we believe that this is also an opportunity for Brazil to bring political leaders together in a consensus for a democratic governance and to build a long-term vision that can provide stability, sustainability, and prosperity for Brazil. We would love to have your perspectives on that, Minister Haddad. Por favor.
Em particular sobre os eventos de...
Especially regarding the events.
Posterior aos eventos.
Olha, eu penso que...
Well, we can't deny that the extreme right, the far right, has really organized itself in Brazil. Not only did it organize itself well, it was elected in 2018. It governed during 4 years, and it was free to approve whatever it wished inside our Congress. And undeniably, it will be the opposition that Lula's government will face. That's what it's about, and that is very serious, because despite the fact that Brazil has seen the far-right movements in the past, especially between the wars and after the Second World War, it never was able to elect itself. And now it has managed to get elected. However, I think President Lula has established a very wide coalition, a very strong coalition at the first round. And at the second round of elections, he broadened this front, and now he has a solid base that is a bit fragile due to the way in which parties are organized in Brazil, but I think it is robust enough for us to be able to face the challenges that will come and that we will have to face, especially coming from the far right. I think the response to what happened on January 8th was very important institutionally speaking. So 27 governors, all of them were there. We had representatives from all three powers, all came together to make the necessary decisions, what was really required for us to be able to overcome the mess that Brasilia became on the 8th. So the governor of the federal district was removed from office. We created a special secretariat, and in less than 24 hours, it had been settled. We had lots of people who were arrested, people who damaged all these buildings, and these people now will have to respond for their actions. And we are now looking at who financed the acts, because they weren't in Brasilia, but we have been able to identify some of them, and they will need to respond for what they did. I am concerned because, of course, you're not in a comfortable position when you have an opposition that is extreme. We need parties that are committed to democracy being elected, and that's not what it's about now in Brazil. But I believe that with President Lula, and because of all the different personalities that want to collaborate with the government, I do think we will be successful.
Gostaria, por favor, também compartilhar suas perspectivas.
Could you please also, Marina, share your perspectives of what happened? Thank you, Marisol. First of all, I'd like to thank the opportunity It's very symbolic to have the Minister of the Environment and the Minister of Finance sitting here to debate the perspectives for Brazil. And as was mentioned by Minister Haddad, how we're going to overcome the huge difficulties we're facing. I agree completely with Minister Haddad when he says that for no country, for no government, is it comfortable to be in a position where the opposition is made up of extremists. But on the other hand, the Brazilian government understands that this is a phenomenon that doesn't happen only in Brazil, it's happening all over the world. Of course, democracies are working very hard to be able to face the situation. These situations create a lot of instability, not only politically speaking, but also in terms of economics, social aspects, public policies, and also to be able to invest and improve people's quality of life. On the other hand, we don't want to be to find comfort that what happened in Brazil also happened in the capital and it maybe happened elsewhere. We don't find this reassuring. That's why what Minister Haddad has said is important for us to consider that we were able, yes, to respond in very few hours, showing that our institutions are strengthened. And despite the fact that we have a divided society, 60 million voted for Lula and 48 million voted for Bolsonaro, a good portion of the people who voted for Bolsonaro do not agree with these extreme acts. So I believe we are facing an international phenomenon. We're going to act very strongly internally so we can strengthen our democracy, but not only Brazilian democracy. We have to look at what is happening in Latin America. It will be a joint effort through partnerships. President Lula is set to travel throughout the region so that we can have this action. It will be an action of solidarity, and it will always have to be a response that looks at economic aspects, social aspects, and political aspects. We need to be able to face the very serious problems we have, social problems, environmental problems, so that we have good perspectives for Brazil.
That stability that Brazil is seeking, to learn the lessons from other countries, not to repeat them, but rather to find consensus solutions to strengthen Brazil's democratic governance, which is fundamental to attract investments, to boost the economy. And it is great to have you, Minister Haddad. É muito importante sua presença no Forum Econômico Mundial.
It's great to have you here, Minister Haddad.
That you presented recently to reduce Brazil's deficit and to boost the economy. Can you share with us just the highlights of that plan?
Olha, na verdade,
well, to be honest, it's not really an ambitious plan, and I'm going to explain why. We are inheriting a problem that wasn't caused by the pandemic, but rather by the fact that the government lost these last elections. So when the previous government saw that it was in an unfavorable situation, it took lots of measures to spend. Some maybe were justified in social terms, but they were done in a very political way. And also, they had taxes exemptions up to 1.1% of the Brazilian GDP that they did not earn. And so that created a huge unbalance in our accounts, and we need to settle that. So what are we doing in basic terms? Brazil had a primary surplus And that was reduced, that surplus was reduced over the last decade, especially with the political crisis of 2013 that led to the impeachment in 2016. So looking at history, we want to be able to have revenues and expenses that are the same as the level before the pandemics, which is 18.7% at the federal level. So if we're able to do that in 2 years' time, we will be able to have zero deficit. And this will be much easier if we're able to approve the tax reform that is currently in Congress and is supported by President Lula. This reform was not approved by the previous, not supported by the previous government, but it does have our support. So we want to balance our accounts, and this will come accompanied by a series of measures, regulatory measures for credit, for reindustrialization, looking at the ecologic transition that is necessary, and Marina is a representative of that. With regional integration, President Lula wants to stimulate this regional coordination starting right now. He's going to Argentina soon. So if we're able to do that and rebalance our accounts, you can be sure that Brazil will start growing again above global averages, as happened during the first governments of Lula, growing above average. When the world had 2.8%, Brazil had 4.5% during the 2 mandates of President Lula, and that's what we want to go back to, being able to grow above global average with, of course, more social justice and looking at how to preserve the environment.
Ambitious. And I think it's very important. Brazil is the 12th largest economy in the world. Despite the international context, you have so many resources. And I think it's really important to have that focalized approach and have all the support, not only from other leaders in the government or in other political parties, but also from business. And what has been that reaction that you have perceived from investors and from business leaders to your plans?
Olha, eu creio que a reação foi muito.
I think the reaction has been very good. Today I was reading some articles in the Brazilian media about this topic, and I also read some articles in the international media. There's a Financial Times article about the measures that we have taken. I think these measures are focused on an objective that everyone can understand and that is easy to accomplish. But of course, as you said, we want to go beyond. In terms of the economy now, we have some specific problems, a big retail store that's going through some problems in Brazil, but I think the market has understood what Lula's government means: stability, predictability, a development plan for the mid and long term that is socially responsible. So I think the authority of the president and his reputation that he has built through his first 2 governments will allow the country to prosper.
We have seen how the world has embraced President Lula. We observed many dignitaries that accompanied the inauguration, but we were also very impressed to see how welcome his environmental plans were during the meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh during COP27, where you were also, Minister Marina, a participant. Can you also share with our audience what are your priorities? There have been some very important announcements already made, beginning with your title. You're no longer the Minister of Environment, you're the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. But there's been other announcements that are very relevant that we would be very grateful if you could share with us, but also some of your priorities moving forward.
Yes, President Lula went to COP27 and was received very warmly. people would go up to him, and they had been saying for a while that Brazil was missed in all these multilateral events. And we also miss the leadership that Brazil has always had in terms of the environmental agenda, the fight against desertification, the protection of biodiversity, all the contributions we were able to make to the negotiation processes and everything we were able to gain in terms of the climate agenda. Brazil is the first developing country that has established CO2 targets, and we have here a member of the IPCC. He has helped us a lot. Professor Carlos Nobre is here, and unfortunately, of course, that leadership was disappeared during the past 4 years, putting Brazil in a very difficult situation when we look at the environmental agenda, the human rights agenda, but also how to fight social inequality. Brazil was no longer in the FAO World Hunger Map, but now it is back. We had reached a virtuous cycle to be able to reduce deforestation, and today we have record levels of deforestation, and the environmental agenda has been completely dismantled. So the announcements made by President Lula are basically, we are back to the international agenda to talk about climate, to talk about targets that are ambitious for the climate, but also for biodiversity. We agreed that we need to preserve 30% of these priority areas to have a good conservation of biodiversity all over the world. This was something that came from the biodiversity COP, but Brazil wants to also make a contribution on the topic of climate change. Not only what we will be able to do internally, but also helping so that we can go even beyond regulation. There is good global regulation, but the investments are lacking. And the 100 billion that the wealthy country had committed are still not here. We need to have resources for mitigation actions, but also adaptation. And now, based on the last convention on biodiversity and on climate, we have a new agenda with new commitments for vulnerable countries. Brazil also wants to be a leader for a global initiative that defends forests, and we are talking with all the countries that have large forests so that we can reduce the amount of forest that is being lost at the global level. And we have a commitment internally to reach zero deforestation by 2030. We have a commitment so that Brazil will be able to go from an economy that is carbon intensive to a low carbon economy, so talking about ecology, the ecological transition, bioeconomy, all of these investments. I'm very proud to talk about them here, but all of that has been agreed with by our Minister of Finance, and I think the synergy we have established, it's a characteristic of Lula's government for the third time now, as he has been chosen by the Brazilian people to govern them for the third time, and we will have a government that will work strongly to make democracy more stable, to face social inequalities, because we have 33 million people who are hungry, and to work to establish a new cycle of prosperity with infrastructures for sustainable development. We have a huge potential because we have a very clean energy matrix to be able to produce green hydrogen. All of that will be essential for economies and for countries who are facing energy insecurity, especially in the context of the war, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So these are opportunities that we consider to be very promising, but of course not losing sight of the difficulties to be able to have a stable democracy. I think it's better to announce less and do more than to announce a lot of things and then be frustrated. But talking about our targets in terms of deforestation, we have the Amazon Fund that is back. We have a plan to fight against deforestation, and we have reestablished all the teams to be able to fight that.
Minister Haddad himself has helped us to add another 500 million to the environmental ministries, and that the donation funds are not subject to the expenditure caps. And this is very important, promising. Brazil wants to be a country that is economically prosperous, socially just, democratically and environmentally sustainable. Thank you.
It provides hope to all of us that believe in inclusive and sustainable growth. My next question was going to be how the two ministers were going to articulate your plans, but you've already answered that question, and I think your dynamics makes it also very obvious. So let me just very quickly ask you, President Lula announced Belém do Pará as the city that will, as a candidate city to host COP30. What are your ambitions towards COP30?
I think that when President Lula presented Brazil as a candidate to host COP30 in Amazonia and in Belém city, it was a show that we have statements which are grand, but that we want them to materialize, to translate into practice. When we say we want to fight the serious problem of deforestation concerning not only indigenous peoples that are living through a very serious situation of illegal mining in indigenous land, to hold the climate meeting in Brazil is to give out a signal that we do want to attain these objectives, and we want it to take place in no longer the realm of statements, but rather of results. Brazil has always led by example in fighting poverty, in fighting deforestation, in reducing CO2 emissions. It has attempted to thread an innovative economic development pathway. Now, in a partnership with other Amazonian nations, we are making investments in order to get bioeconomics going and to hold a COP climate meeting in Amazonia is a show of our commitment of our country and continent with this important issue for the world, and also to say that the responsibility of preserving it, it's not ours alone. We need partnership, technological support, and we also need the world to do its part, because we can cut down deforestation in Amazon to zero, but if the rest of the world still emits CO2, Amazonia is going to be destroyed likewise. So we have common, although differentiated, responsibilities regarding these great natural wealths that we have.
Also about livelihoods, about making sure that those people that live in the Amazon, in the forest, but also in the urban areas, are assured with dignified livelihoods. I think that is also a very important part of the whole program, as it is what you mentioned with regard to technology, so that productivity can continue in a more intense way, but not in an expanded way. So we really wish you also a lot of success on your road to achieving those very important objectives, not only for Brazil, but also for the rest of the world. And Brazil will also chair the G20. in 2024, and that will be part of your international portfolio, Minister Haddad. What are your plans? What are your ambitions and vision for the Brazil presidency of the G20 in 2024?
Bom, nós vamos ter uma... Antes de mais nada...
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that in the first two administrations by President Lula, Marina had an enthusiastic support of the then education minister, and now she has the support of the finance minister. This means that the threshold has changed